Hey, how you doing? Justin here, coming to you for part 2 of my little forest walkie-talkie little thing about my life story, which makes it sound a little bit ridiculous really, and I'm kind of pleasantly surprised that there are people interested. Let me do that again. I had to stop to let Ziggs do some business. This video is going to take us from my college. Now I should point out that college in Australia, at least when I was growing up there, it might have changed by now, was after high school but before university. So we did high school, which was 12 to 16 roughly. I was pretty young for my years at school, and then college was, I went to Elizabeth College, and that was for 2 years, where you kind of specialise much more depending on what it is that you wanted to do, if you wanted to go to university or not, or you could go off and do an apprenticeship instead or whatever. So toward the end of college, I knew I wanted to go to university. Dad kind of made it clear that I should go to university, and he'd be pretty disappointed if I didn't, and I thought it was a good idea. And in my town there was only one music university, which was the Tasmanian Conservatorium of Music, which was a classical music school. And so that's what I decided I was going to do. And so I kind of looked into how I might get into the school. I figured I could probably play well enough, but I went to see the head of guitar. It was an amazing teacher, John McMillan. I really, massive respect for John. He taught me so much stuff. Without John's guidance, I definitely wouldn't have made it as a professional guitar player, I don't think. He changed a lot of stuff for me. Anyway, so John owned the local guitar store called Southern Music, which owned the teaching kind of shop where I had my very first lessons with Pete Thompson when I was just a little kid. Anyway, I went to see John in the store and said, look, I'd like to come to the conservatorium. He kind of knew me because I'd been in the shop and played stuff in the shop and bought stuff from the shop. And he said, well, I know you can play, but can you read music? And I said, well, no, not really. And he said, well, you need to be able to read music to get in. He said, I can teach you a lot of stuff when you're in, but you need to prove to me that you've got it, what it takes to deal with it. So he gave me a piece of music. It's a saw study, the Segovia saw studies. Most of anyone who studied classical guitar will be familiar with it. And it was number 9 or 10. It's like loads of block chords. Do, 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 do. Really, it's a complicated, horrible looking piece of music. It looks like a fly had diarrhea on a page. It's really just mostly black. And he said, look, I'll give you a month. So come back in a month. If you can play this, then I'll make sure that you get in. I mean, I had to do a formal audition and stuff as well, but it was really his decision as head of guitar. And so I went and bought I think it was the Berkeley reading music book. Berkeley, I don't know what they're called, the Berkeley books, William G. Levitt, which explained, I remember it had a little chart in it, which showed like where the notes were on the stave and where the different places you could play it on the guitar neck. And then I just sat down and figured it out. I wrote it out as a tab as well, I think. And I learned to play it, not very well, and with all of the wrong techniques and stylistically incorrect and stuff, but I got the notes right. I think it took about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I went back to John and said, here it is, I figured it out. Will you let me in? And he said, absolutely. So that was awesome. And I can't remember much about my audition, to be honest. I must have done one. I don't have much recollection of it. But anyway, so I finished college, and that meant that I was then a music student studying classical music, which for the most part I didn't really know much about. I didn't hate it, but it wasn't really what I was into. I was much more into jazz and rock and fusion. Maybe not jazz so much at that point. I mean, I'd learned some pieces, but it wasn't like my thing yet. And so also at the same time I was still playing in this band Valhalla, this rock band that was going pretty good. We were doing quite a few gigs. It was a lot of fun. I was learning loads. I can't remember why the band broke up. or what happened there, why we stopped playing together. I just don't remember. But yeah, that finished. Also, actually in college, another interesting little side story. In order to make a bit of extra money, I started working at a PA company, setting up and doing mixing, live sound mixing. I can't remember the name of the store. I think the guy who ran it was a guy called Ian, and there was a receptionist there called Wendy, who was a fantastic jazz singer, and I was totally smitten with her. In fact, I did my first gig with her band, Wendy and the Wherefore, out there. It was probably when I was still at college. I remember sitting down with the bass player called Kim Cambridge, excellent musician, and he took me through these charts of, I can't remember what it was, Night and Day, Cole Porter tunes and Duke Ellington and stuff like that. And I just remember looking at these charts and thinking, oh my God, like, how am I going to deal with this? I had loads of chords that I'd never seen before, 13 flat 9. It was like, what the earth is that? So anyway, Kim explained a whole bunch of stuff to me that was really helpful. And I did that gig. I think it was called The Taste of Tasmania. Petrifying gig it was for a rock guy, trying to play with a bunch of serious jazz guys. But good fun, and I learned stuff, and that was the point. I think I was playing in a brass band as well called Legs and Brass, run by the fabulous saxophonist called Fred Bradshaw, kind of Paul Desmond style saxophone player. Incredible tone, great lines, beautiful player, really nice guy. He taught me a lot as well about, he gave me records and stuff to listen to when I was getting into jazz a bit later on. So now, where do we go to from there? So I get into the conservatorium. Conservatorium was pretty difficult for me. I found I wasn't very interested in studying Bach chorale harmony and all of this stuff, the sonata form and things. I did kind of learn it, but it wasn't really what I was interested in. But I did it, and I think what the saving grace for me with the con was that how good a teacher John was. So on the very first day, John said, look, these are the things that you have to do to pass this course. You have to learn these scales this way. You have to learn these pieces and play them like this. And he was very specific, and he said, look, as long as you do that, I'll teach you all of the other stuff you want to know. Arpeggios, scales, jazz, harmony, all of that other interesting stuff. And he did. And so on the very first session with him, he sat down and he wrote me an 8-hour a day practice routine, and he expected it to be done. It was like little check boxes. So it's freezing cold today, my nose is running a bit. It sort of had stuff on, he divided it into music theory. I'll see if I can dig out some of the sheets actually, I'm not sure I've still got them, but it had boxes on one side of scales and harmony and theory and classical pieces and jazz and arpeggios and all of this stuff. And then an amount of time I should practice each one for. And then I had to tick the boxes off. And John was if I hadn't done my homework when I showed up for the lesson, he'd send me home. Something that I did for more advanced students later on as well, I'd literally just show up and he'd say, well, we're working on this today. And I'd say, well, I haven't really worked on that. And he'd be like, well, off you go, see you next week. He was a pretty hard teacher, but really good. And so that was a bit of a shock because I'd practiced or played a lot before. But that was the first time I'd had even an inkling that if you wanted to be really good, you had to do, hours and hours a day. And my life suddenly changed to being, Ziggy, we're not playing, she's just found a children's glove on the floor, excellent. From being fairly relaxed and gigging a lot and having a lot of fun to suddenly, waking up early in the morning and then practicing all day. I think I made myself a bit ill as well. I wasn't eating properly. I'd moved out of home by this stage, and I didn't eat well. Oh, Ziggy's just chucked another load of business for me to clean up. So I'll have to do that. I'm not going to try and keep talking to you while I clean up a poo. Okay, party over. So as I was saying, I kind of got myself a little bit ill in that period because I was literally, my girlfriend at the time was a hairdresser, and I used to we had a really nice beachfront apartment in Sandy Bay, and I used to drop her at work and then drive to my parents' house, which is where I do all my practice, at my mum's house. That's where I had all my stuff set up. And I'd practice all day, probably didn't eat lunch very often, and then would try and have, I'd pick the girlfriend up from work and have something like KFC for dinner, or, pretty rubbishy food. And I remember not being very well for a bit, but I was just totally absorbed with doing this practice. That's where John really introduced me to proper transcribing, like writing it down and, checking it. And, I was just totally absorbed with playing and practicing as much as I possibly could. I timed everything, I wrote it all down. I've got practice diaries, which are really interesting, which I've still got, nearly all my practice diaries. And so I was playing still in the band. I had this black and blue. I need to go back a bit. So Valhalla had broken up. I was looking for another band. I can't remember the connection, but it might have been through working as, setting up PAs and stuff. I encountered these guys, Mark and Andrew Franklin and Pete Menina, and we had a band called Black and Blue. And those guys were a lot older than me, a lot more experienced, and really, really good musicians. Pete was a fabulous drummer with a great time. Andrew sat in the pocket really well. He wasn't a complicated bass player, but he played real solid, loud, with big amplifiers, and he really, he meant it. And Mark, who was the singer, Mark Franklin, fantastic singer, fantastic songwriter, great guitar player. I was really in awe of his ability. He just sang really well. He was really into writing, which up to that point I hadn't really encountered a whole lot of people writing their own material in the way he did. And he'd sit down and just play this song and sing it on acoustic guitar, and it was just great. He's one of those guys that I really think deserved to be more famous than he was. I think he's still in Tassie. I think he still plays. Haven't caught up with him for a little while, but I should, because he was a mega musician. Really big respect for him. And so I joined this band. It was kind of funny. They were all into like black leather jackets and jeans and boots, leather boots and stuff, and I was wearing trainers and fluorescent orange suit jackets and this kind of funny pseudo-punk, like almost 6-6 Sputnik, if anyone remembers them. Like, I was into this very weird style of, very, very uncool. But anyway, so I was kind of into that. And we gigged a lot. So if you imagine my first year at college, I was playing a lot with these guys. This is kind of bigger nightclubs, so probably, maybe from a few hundred up to 1,000 people in the room, I suppose, at a club. And that was, and I was also teaching then. I taught still at the Hobart College of Music, teaching in the afternoons and evenings, just teaching one-on-one in this little room. And I also, when I started teaching, studying at the conservatorium, I started teaching at Elizabeth College, where I just left as well. So I was doing a lot of teaching, a lot of playing, and a lot of studying. So I was just, from dawn until dusk, I was into staying up late as well. So it was, I was just doing guitar all the time. I was trying to stick to 8 hours a day. I must have been doing at least 2 or 3 hours teaching a day as well, plus gigs. So it was pretty mental. One other little story that I should bring into the fray as well, which was still with I think it was with Valhalla, or was it later? It might have been even with Black and Blue. I can't remember. Where I first met the Australian legend guitar player Simon Patterson, who's lucky to count as a friend now, really lovely guy, an incredible guitar player. And he came to see me play at a pub called Maloney's in Hobart. And I think it was with Valhalla. Anyway, he came over. I knew he was there straight away. I'd clocked in. He played on Hey Hey It's Saturday, which was a big show in Tassie. And, he's a really proper dude, And I was a bit in awe of the fact that he was there. And then he wanted to chat afterwards. And he said, man, you play really well, but your tone sucks, man. You've got to do something about your tone. I was like, what do you mean? He said, that guitar, it doesn't sound good. You need to go and buy a Strat. And I think I was playing a Jackson at the time. And so the very next day, I went out to McCann's Music in Elizabeth Street, and I bought myself an American Stratocaster, the red one that you see in some of the videos. That was my very first kind of proper guitar, expensive one. You know, McCann's, for the local musicians, used to do like a credit thing where we could have, come on Ziggy, Ziggy, we're not going all the way up there, come on, Six, come on, come on. Yeah, so I could get the guitar and pay it off, you know, over a few months or whatever. I was teaching, this Hobart College of Music was upstairs of the McCann's Music Store, so I could kind of, they knew where I wasn't going to get very far. But they were really supportive music school, guitar store. Exactly what you kind of needed, really, in that kind of place. Ziggy! Oh, Ziggy's meeting her friend. Didn't realise that the dog had come down to see her. They can have a little play. There's a guy there talking to his phone. He probably just thinks I'm just as weird sitting there talking to this little camera. So yeah, this music store was really super friendly for local musicians, and we could get credit notes and buy stuff on tick or whatever if we were feeling a bit skint on any particular week. So it was a pretty cool, very cool little music shop. So big thanks to all of the guys at McCann's Music. Hey, come on, Six. Ziggy, come on, come on. Ziggy, Ziggy, come on, come on, come on, Six, come on. Sometimes she doesn't want to come with me until I start running, and then she'll always join me. Anyway, so yeah, so that was a very fortuitous meeting. I bought that, and I think I bought a 30th anniversary Marshall, the blue Marshall head, around the same time. And then I was that really changed a lot of things for me, because I suddenly sounded much better than I had previously. And that's obviously important. How you sound is a big part of the deal. So, yeah, so that was just another little side point. I still go and make sure I catch up with Simon whenever I'm in Australia. Incredible guitar player if you don't know his work. And I think he might be doing some teaching in Tasmania, possibly even teaching at the conservatorium where I studied. I'm not exactly certain. I need to check that out. Anyway, so I joined Black and Blue. I was doing loads of teaching, trying to think of what else I've forgotten about that period. I think that was about it. It was just, one of the things that I can't stress enough, another one of those kind of lucky things. Ziggy, come on, you're being very naughty today. Come on, Ziggy, come on. One of the things that I'm really appreciative of growing up in Tasmania, you might think like growing up on a little island of, 120,000 people or whatever it was at the time, or maybe that was a capital city, I can't remember. But you'd think that there'd be no gigs and, not many musicians, but there were loads of musicians and loads of live gigs. I was quite often in that period gigging, and particularly just slightly later than that when I joined the next band, which I'll talk about in a sec. I was playing 5, 6, 7 nights a week, sometimes 2 gigs in one night. We'd do one gig, play, pack up and go to another venue and do another gig. And people just loved live music. There was we had cover bands had fans that would follow us around from gig to gig and always be there, and we'd learn songs for them and stuff, and it was really such a vibrant music scene. I don't know if it's still like that now. Any of you guys, musicians from Tassie, if anyone's watching that, let me know. But there were just all of these clubs, and they were big clubs. Some of them would have 1,000 people, the Cadillac Club and Travs and Maloney's and Stoppies, and there were all of these clubs that were just rocking, filled with people partying. A lot of the gigs were really late. I remember a bunch of times going on at 1 a.m, and so I'd kind of do sound check in the afternoon, go home and have a sleep, and then do the gig and then party afterwards, because I didn't have the staying power for staying up all of that time. So I can't remember what happened to Black and Blue, whether I got kicked out, whether I left, or I just can't remember at all what happened, which is a bit silly, but I can't. So I left that band and somehow found myself in another band called Ozlingo, which is run by a guy called Tony. Very good businessman, good singer, okay guitar player, but great front man of the band, really successful at running this band. He'd run it for before I joined. Great drummer in that band, Rob DiMartino. He could thrash those drums. That was really awesome. And then we had a bass player called Steve Yost. Great musician, great singer. Big hit with the ladies, Steve. So that band was kind of my first really super professional band, I guess, where what should we do? Take the crest? Yeah, let's go up the crest. This is nice up here. And that band was gigging a lot. That was the first like properly professional outfit where, we got a list of where we were doing the gigs and how long they'd be for, and it was definitely Tony's band, no question. It was his thing, and he paid us. Possibly not all we were due all of the time. There was definitely some dodgy stuff going on there, but I don't want to get into that now. It's not fair. Ziggy, what are you doing? Oh, Ziggy saw another doggy. It's gone. Oh, I can't wait till she's good enough at recall to get let off the leash. Come on, Ziggs. Ziggy, come on. Ziggs, come on. So, yeah, that band was really good. And we did a lot of gigs. That was where I got into singing background vocals a lot more, was in that band. Hadn't really done a lot of singing before that. I think we recorded some originals, but that might have been later. So I can't remember what happened, but there were some changes within the band. And Rob left, I can't remember why, Rob the drummer. And another drummer came in called Ben Wignall. And Ben was the main drummer who I worked with for a long time, and he was my best mate for ages. We shared a house together, and he was a really dedicated drummer. He did the same on drums that I did on guitar, and we shared this house with a piano player called Alison, and we'd both wake up in the morning, have breakfast together, talk about what we were doing that day, and then go off to our rooms to practice. He'd be practicing drums upstairs and I'd be practicing guitar downstairs. And then we'd meet up and have lunch together, talk about what we were doing, and then back to our rooms. And then, because we were playing in the band together, we'd jump in his ute, which we used to call the uterus, and we'd drive off to our gigs, do a gig, come home, repeat. We did that for at least a year, probably more. At some point, Steve Yost left and Michael Shelley joined on bass. Michael became a really close friend as well, worked with in lots of different circumstances. Great bass player, great songwriter, great producer, runs a studio now in Hobart. I think it's called the Green Room. So that was a bit of a change there, but the band kept on going. That was, again, just a lot of learning. One little shout, I wanted to try and inject some little tips and stories and stuff, things that I learned. And one of the things I remember when I was playing with Lingo, it was called Oz Lingo to start off with, and then Lingo later, but I can't remember when it changed. There was another guy, an older guitar player called Jim Lang, who he came to see me play with Tony. He was in a band afterwards with this idiot politician singer bloke, and after the set, I was staying next to him at the bar, and he was like, "Dude, you play really good, but you don't look like you play really good," or something to that effect. And basically, when I was on stage at those, in the early days, I just stood there and played, and probably played all the right stuff, but didn't look like it. And I remember after that, the next time I saw Jim play and watched what was going on, and he was jumping around. It was like, yeah, okay, now I kind of get it now. Like, it really looked, excuse that horrible squeaky sound, Ziggy doesn't like it either. Come on, Ziggs, through the gate, come on. It's not going to hurt you, come on, it's just a gate. Where should we go? There's a bulldozer over there, so let's not go that way. Oh, Ziggy. Hey, what you doing? Hey, what you doing, silly? Where was I? Oh, Jim. So yeah, and I saw Jim play, and he'd play a lot simpler solos, but he'd hold his guitar out the side and give it all of this stuff and play behind his head and all of this sort of malarkey. And I was like, yeah, the crowd goes nuts for that sort of stuff. So at that point in that band, everything changed on that front, and because I knew I could kind of play okay, So I started trying to make sure that the audience knew that I could play okay, and started doing more show-offy stuff, like playing behind the head and, you know, spin around, hold the guitar out the side and all of that sort of thing, which was, I think, really good for my, you know, my musical craft. Ziggy, we're going to go this way because I haven't been this way before. Come on, Ziggs, let's try a new thing. So yeah, that was a real one of those little tips that somebody gave me that really changed my path a bit, so thanks for that, Jim. There were lots of great musicians around at that time that were all really helpful. I mentioned before this saxophone player called Fred Bradshaw. He was really helpful on understanding of jazz. There was another guitar player, a guy who taught at that school called Andrew Sweeney, and he opened my eyes to lots of stuff as well. I think we spent too much time watching Star Trek, but we also had some jams and learned about playing jazz. I remember sitting around with another guitar player called Andy Page, who's a fantastic, incredible musician. Again, I was always super jealous of his ability. I remember sitting on my mum's floor with him, my mum's house, trying to figure out, you know, this idea of making jazz chord changes as being like this super duper complicated thing. Couldn't really get our heads around it at all. We just got some bit of doggy action here. Hey?
Do you want us to put us on the list?
No, it's fine. She should have a play. She just has really, really terrible recall, so she has to. Yeah. She's only 4 months old, so she'll head off, and then I won't see her again for ages. She's a border collie poodle.
Oh, she's so cute.
Yeah, she's a little cutie.
Yeah.
Yours are cockapoo, labradoodly things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect guess.
Aha. There we go. Oh, Ziggy, careful. Border collie poodle. I guess you could call it a border doodle. I'm not sure what they...
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she's into it. Hey, who's that, Six? Who's that?
Oh, she was a bit concerned then with the bark.
She's
She's a sussy. She's a bit scared now.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry, Ziggy. Hey.
Hey. She's fine.
No, she's good. She's like the most excitable puppy that the world's ever seen. She just,
Oh, she's gorgeous.
she goes crazy. Oh well, it's like the dog walking club.
It's the you'll get to see your 6 dogs a day that you're
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Come on, Ziggy. We're gonna go this way. Come on, Ziggs. Come on. No, not down that. Whoa. Right. Okay, you can meet this fella too. Here we go. There we go. Hey. It is. Oh, look at that, Ziggy. Come on. He doesn't want to play with you so much, Ziggy. Come on. We're going to go this way. Come on, Ziggs. Ziggy, come on. Ziggy, come on. Oh, there you go. Sorry for the diversion. And now I've completely forgotten where we were at, or what I was talking about, or who I was talking about. Anyway, so at some point I left Lingo to join another band called Anonymous Rhinoceros, which was probably my most fun band that I was ever in. It was with the drummer Nathan Sproul, who was the drummer that I played with when I was in my early years of high school. Kristen Holland on bass, who was an incredible singer and an incredible bass player, and did them both at the same time. Scott Cashin on saxophone. Matt, I can't remember Matt's last name, on keyboards. I think that's it. And we played like funk and fusion, so we played stuff like Primus and Pearl Jam and James Brown, and it was just great music. That was just Foo Fighters and stuff, you know. It was just the best thing for me, getting to join that band and playing with those musicians. It was just really good fun. We partied really hard, we played a lot, and it was just great on every level. And I'm so appreciative of that band particularly, you know, on my journeys. That was one that just really made a big impact on me. You know, I was learning all of this complicated stuff at the con, and I'd been getting into, so as far as school went, actually kind of tying that back in, I was still studying classical guitar. I'd got a lot better at that. I'd also learned a lot more about jazz. I was really into Joe Pass at that time, and I must have transcribed 20 or 30 Joe Pass chord solos, most of which I've kind of forgotten, but it's on my to-do list this year to revise them, because I just love his playing so much and I don't want to let that completely slip. I was playing a lot of Joe Satriani and Steve Vai. I discovered fusion like Scott Henderson and tribal tech, Chick Corea, stuff like the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which I played some of that in one of the bands with Ben, a little fusion thing that we had going. Jean-Luc Ponty, Al Di Meola, all of that stuff. You know, I was really full-on fusion head, I guess, at that point. Mike Stern, John Schofield, you know, all of those things were just ringing in my ears, and I was having a really great time. So all of those ideas that I was learning, you know, stuff like John Schofield licks or whatever, I could try and pop them out when I was playing with the Rhinos. Incidentally, Anonymous Rhinoceros got its name because they were the two most often misspelt words in the English language. I think that was Kristen's idea. I think they were around before I joined. I'm pretty sure that they were. I can't remember exactly, but they were, you know, yeah, really, really fun outfit that was. Yeah, spent a lot of time partying with Nathan. You know, that was, yeah, we had some really, really riotously good parties in that era as well, you know. 20 years old or whatever, and playing in bands, and it was kind of as rock and roll as you could be in a covers band. So sorry about that little pause there. I ran out of battery on my GoPro and I had to patch it in with this power bank thing that I'm going to try using now, see if that works. So whilst playing in that band, I started thinking more about what I wanted to do, whether if I was going to keep with this guitar thing, you know, what I was going to do to study. I hadn't finished my degree at the conservatorium, but I was kind of losing interest in continuing there. John Macmillan had quit with some political row with the new head of the con. The new head of the con appointed his wife as the teacher, which is Mandy DeHaan. And she was actually a really great teacher for me. She taught me lots of stuff about tone and touch that John wouldn't have done. John was a bit more technical and she was a bit more musical. So it wasn't that I didn't like her as a teacher, I just kind of felt like I'd had enough of all of that school stuff. But saying that, but then I wanted to go to school over to LA, so I mean, maybe I just had enough of the classical stuff is probably more what I meant. So I started exploring the idea of going to either the Musicians Institute in Hollywood or the Guitar Institute in London. My dad's British, could get a British passport, so I knew that if I went to London I could stay. So I kind of thought, well, let's have a go at doing that one. You know, that could be a pretty cool thing to do. I'd saved up a bit of money, you know, I'd been gigging a lot, so I'd had some money, but I was still pretty short. So I applied for a grant from a thing called Arts Tasmania that funds artists, and they gave me my airfare and my school fees. So that meant that the money that I had would be enough to, let me just get this gate open. Conzigs, don't be scared of gates, they're fine. Would be enough to live on. My dad lent me some money. He kind of agreed to give me, I can't remember how much it was, £100 a week or something like that to live on. And then I had to get in. So I'm trying to remember exactly what I put on the audition tape. It was a jazz standard, perhaps All the Things You Are or something like that, where I played like a walking bass thing, I think, to start, and then the melody and then a solo. And I pulled in like all of the best musicians around. We recorded in Stu Long's studio. I can't remember what the studio was called, but Stuart Long was like the sound engineer. I mean, there's so many little stories I'm thinking about now that, you know, my first experiences of recording in that studio to tape and doing my first session for Phil McKercher for a TV ad, and then hearing myself on telly. There was all sorts of little things that happened that I suppose I could go into more detail of, but just not now. Anyway, Ziggy, stop eating. Does anyone else have dogs that want to eat horse poo? I mean, what's going on with that? Ziggy, no, you're not eating poos. That's disgusting. Okay, sorry about that. That's probably a bit more information than you really wanted. Hopefully you're not eating your breakfast. So yeah, and I think I did a version of Always With You, Always With Me, Satriani, Midnight by Joe Satriani, and I think I might have done, I can't remember exactly what else was on it. I've got the demo tape somewhere. Anyway, I sent it off to London, and they sent me back a letter saying you've been accepted, and it was like, way! It was super exciting, you know, kind of sad that I was leaving all my friends, pretty scary because, you know, I hadn't travelled outside of Australia before. In fact, I'd only been a few times to Melbourne and Sydney. I wasn't very learned. So it was a pretty massive step into the wide world for me. I was quite terrified. But pleased with myself that I'd got, you know, little kid from Tasmania had got accepted into this big music school. and we'll talk about that more when we hit that era. But yeah, that was super exciting times. I think that's about it, really. The next thing would be about the trip to London and what happened when I got there and started at the Guitar Institute, which was 1996. You know, that was a big... I wrote down some stuff on a piece of paper because there's so much stuff going on in this era that I thought might help spark my memory. I think that's about it. One funny story, it sounds a bit show-offy, but I just saw the note of it, was at the conservatorium, a lot of the other students looked down on me because I had really long hair and I played in a band, and, you know, I was into electric guitar as well as... I think they kind of thought of me as a bit kind of half-assed on my classical thing. All of those guys were going to go into orchestras and stuff, and I wasn't. And I remember we had a strings meeting where all of the strings students had to get together, and Christian Voidovich, who was the head of strings and a world-class cello player, liked me a lot and was, you know, really supportive of the fact that I did stuff outside of the classical domain. I think he'd had similar explorations in maybe pop and really contemporary music. Anyway, in this thing, he stood up in front of the class, and I can't remember exactly that I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, you know, it's come to my attention that some of you are being disrespectful toward Justin, and you know, if any of you guys did half of the amount of practice that he does, you'd be far better musicians. Did you know that he does at least 8 hours practice a day, and he's thoroughly dedicated to his instrument, and he's outperforming, and you guys just sitting in your rooms and doing, you know, an hour practice a day, and you think that's enough? You know, he really went for them. And I just remember feeling kind of mixed emotions of feeling embarrassed and proud, and yeah, I mean, it was just kind of funny because that was kind of what it was like. There was a few guys there that worked really hard, but a lot of them were lazy as. And I remember being shocked. It was like talking to them, and they were all talking about, you know, we'd finish classes and they'd talk about, you know, going to town or going to the pub or, you know, going to the video arcade. And I'm like, dudes, you got to go and practice. That's, you know, I couldn't understand why anyone was doing anything except practicing at that time. I was just, yeah, I guess that's the thing. And my advice for any of you guys that want to get, you know, if you're young and you want to really grasp this guitar and music stuff, you got to go for it and really give it like everything that you've got. You know, that's all of the guys that I've met, that are good guitar players have had a period where they've worked their asses off. And I think it's ridiculous to think that it happens any other way. If you ever get to meet any of the guys, you know, Steve Vai or whatever, they practice. You know, like when I've spoken to them, I've just been almost shocked. You know, I thought, you know, I used to think I did loads of practice, but those guys did loads of practice. What I did is kind of gnaw practice compared to what they did, you know. So, Ziggy, we're going to go this way. There's some sort of big truck over there. I fancy getting involved with big trucks today. I don't know why there's trucks in the forest. Incidentally, this forest, a few people ask, it's called the Bourne Woods. It's kind of on the south side of Farnham, a long walk or a short drive from my house, and it's where they film a lot of films, as well as being like just I think most of it's owned by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, but not exactly sure how much or how that works, but they do a lot of filming here as well. So probably the most famous film that I'd heard of that was filmed here was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. But I gather there's been quite a few other big films done here as well. I just can't think of what they are. I'm sure you can find it if you look up the Bourne Woods and cinema or something. It's probably even got its own IMDb listing. So yeah, I think that'll do for my little middle period for in between finishing high school and moving on to England. And then I think the next video I'll try and do from when I arrived in England, of which I've got loads of funny stories for you, to probably when I started doing the internet thing, and then I'll do a separate video about you know, how the website started and all of that sort of stuff. I think I need to sketch it out a little bit more. I had to make a spreadsheet and write down like what was going on when, because I just couldn't piece together what bands I was doing when and that sort of stuff. Wow, they've been doing some serious forestry around here. I mean, I know that they call it forest management, but you know, it always kind of creeps me out when I come here and I see all of the stuff's getting chopped down and whatever. They've got loads of it here now. I don't know what's going on. I think it's because they want to bring less trees here and have more shrubland for the birds. That's what somebody told me they're doing here, but I'm not exactly sure that's true. So I hope you've enjoyed this installment. Thanks for your support in actually wanting me to finish off this little series, and yeah, hope it's in some ways interesting for you, and I'll see you for more shortly. Bye bye.